How's it looking here? Do we have a quorum?
I think Supervisor Desmond just joined, so once I promote, we'll have a quorum.
Okay. And how many folks are we missing right now?
We are missing board member Rodriguez, and I believe Lori and Christopher Orlando from staff are joining here shortly. Oh,
Okay, we'll wait a little bit, maybe like 2 more minutes.
okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Here.
Hear you loud and clear, sir.
All right. Hey, Karina.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I'm talking at your chamber at noon today.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And are you doing the Strawberry Festival this year?
Yes.
Or they are?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
It's going to be big. It's going to be great. I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of missed it. It was huge. I mean, you guys, big event.
Yeah.
So did I miss a meeting that I got named vice chair to this committee?
All right. So looks here.
I think everybody is on, ma'am, if you'd like to get started.
Perfect. All right. Well, I would like to call to order the NCTD Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Committee meeting for April 7th, 2022. Anthony, can you please call roll?
Yes, ma'am. Committee Chair Contreras.
Present.
Committee Vice Chair Desmond.
Here.
Committee Member McNamara.
Here.
Committee Member Rodriguez. She's absent. That is the roll call, ma'am.
All right. And Anthony, will you now provide a safety brief and review evacuation procedures?
Yes, ma'am. For those of us here in the building, in the event of an emergency, I'll dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, ma'am.
Awesome. And Anthony, do we have any public speakers today?
We do not, ma'am.
All right. Seeing no public speakers, there are 2 items on the agenda today. Chris Orlando, Chief of Planning, Marketing and Communications, will review agenda item 1, adopt CY 22 MISVID Committee Work Plan. Thanks.
It's a mouthful, so thank you. Well, wanted to welcome the committee to our first meeting of the new Marketing, Service Planning, and Business Development Group. Wanted to start, since this is our first meeting, introducing you to the team that makes up this group. So first, we have as a panelist today, Katie Persons, who is our Director of Service Planning. So Katie's been with the district over 4 years. She comes to us with a deep planning background, working for a number of consulting agencies that serve transit agencies throughout the country. So Katie will be presenting today and leads our service planning for the district. You don't see, but are on the line, Colleen Windsor, who's our Director of Marketing and Communications. Colleen started her career as a broadcast reporter here at several of the local stations. She spent about a little over 10 years at Sandag and worked for the Orange County Fire Authority. And then newest to our team is Mary Dover. Mary joined our staff about 2 weeks ago. She will head up our governmental affairs, and she comes to us from Senator Feinstein's office. Mary headed up Senator Feinstein's San Diego office for about 6 years. So Mary will join us and help with our governmental affairs. So that's the primary team. Next month, you'll meet Alicia Pete Watson, who is our manager of customer service. So in our next meeting, we'll talk about customer service. So you'll meet Alicia at that time. Next slide, please, Anthony. So the first order of business for the committee is to adopt its work plan. And what you see here is essentially a draft of what we propose the work plan for the committee to be. We're in the April meeting, so we have 2 agenda items, which would be to 1, adopt this plan, and then 2, the service implementation plan that you'll see in the next presentation. In June, we would take a look at our customer service feedback and trends, and give you an overview of a peer transit agency analysis that the planning team is working on. And at that point, you would also receive an overview of the marketing and communications program for the coming fiscal year. In October, we propose we do an update on the marketing communications plan that had been implemented, and the efforts to support ridership growth and revenue. We have a breeze and reliability study that is underway that we would like to update you on in October, and then a update on strategic business initiatives. So this is the plan for the year. We propose 3 meetings in this cadence. Your input is welcome on this agenda. If there's items you'd like to hear that aren't here, we're happy to add them. If you'd like to change the order, we can do that as well. But this is what we propose as the work plan for the committee.
Okay, and do we have any public comments for this agenda item?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay, and are there any questions from the committee, from any of the board members? All righty. Well, I'm not seeing any questions here.
Well,
So-
Karina, I'll move to approve the work plan as presented by the staff.
All right. Do I have a second?
McNamara, second.
All right. So may I have a, motion by Supervisor Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Member McNamara. And can we please call for the vote?
Yes, ma'am. On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, seconded by Board Member McNamara to adopt the calendar year 2022 MISPTA Committee Work Plan. Committee Chair Contreras, how do you vote?
Aye.
Committee Vice Chair Desmond, how do you vote?
Yes.
Member McNamara, how do you vote?
Aye.
Committee Member Rodriguez, how do you vote? Absent. Motion passes.
All right. So with that, we'll move on. And we'll still have Chris Orlando here. And we're going to review agenda item 2, which is receiving the fiscal year 2023 service implementation plan assumptions and forecasts.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll introduce the service implementation plan, and then Katie Persons, our Director of Strategic Planning, will do the bulk of the presentation. Also, this presentation is an opportunity for the committee to give input. So as we go through, we welcome your input. If you want to stop us at a particular point and ask a question, we hope this is a little bit more informal. So please do that, and we'll make space for questions at the end, but happy to stop and answer questions along the way if you have them. First slide, please, Anthony. So what is the service implementation plan? So the SIP, as we call it internally, provides a 10-year forecast for the service that we will provide. It's included as a part of our annual operating and capital budget, which is what we submit to SANDAG. It is the basis, the ridership basis and revenue basis for our annual budgeting process. So it looks at revenue hours, it looks at revenue miles, it looks at total hours of service, total miles of service, and of course ridership. So the SIP is our baseline projections for the coming year and the following 10 years of the service that we intend to offer and the ridership that we project will result from that service. Next slide, please. So a couple of key things to know about the SIP. First and foremost, it's guided by board policy number 17, and which covers budget development. And the key point about policy number 17 is to do our projections in a conservative manner. And as the board's established, we do this not only in the way we look at revenues and expenses, but also in the way we look at ridership. And the objective there ultimately is to produce a balanced budget. And so the board policy is that we are conservative in our projections as we do them from a revenue and expense standpoint, but also from a ridership standpoint as well. A key thing that we'll talk about throughout the presentation, and as Katie goes through the specifics of the SIP and where we are now, is that we are still very much in the recovery of the COVID-19 crisis. And you will see that as we look at the ridership and we look at the impact on ridership, we are still very much in this 100-year event, an anomaly in our ridership of COVID. So that will be kind of a consistent theme as we go through the SIP. And it really, because of the level of disruption of that, it really impacts our ability to project out in a meaningful way, because that disruption was so significant. For many years, doing the SIP was a pretty predictable process because you had historical data you could rely on. As we look at the SIP now, we've had this 100-year disruption in terms of the economy, customer patterns, travel patterns, and it really impacts the way we look at projections. And so you'll see that theme as we go through this. Final point is, as I noted earlier, we by board policy make very conservative ridership projections, and we do that so that it supports our balanced budget process. So we want to make sure as we develop this SIP, which is the basis for the budget, those ridership projections are conservative in nature so that it supports development of a balanced budget as we go, not only in the current fiscal year, but in the outlying fiscal years as well. Next slide, please. So as I noted, the FY 2023 budget in the subsequent fiscal year budgets are informed by this SIP. It's other investments as well that can be implemented over a 5-year period that will increase ridership, increase customer service, address state of good repair, and our capital investment priorities as well. Some key strategic priorities you'll see in the 10-year horizon for the SIP include the implementation of the improved Breeze bus frequency, new first and last mile services. We've branded that as NCTD Plus. The implementation of 15-minute frequencies on the Sprinter and increased service on the Coaster Line, some of which we've, as you know, implemented in October, others are in the outlying years. So these are some of the strategic initiatives, and these cover the full 10-year period of the SIP.
Chris, I do have a question regarding the strategic priorities. In particular, the implement improved Breeze bus service frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing the challenges that we're having with labor, is this something that we're going to be able to address to be able to have more frequencies, or can you elaborate on kind of some of the challenges that we face and how we're going to overcome those hurdles just to maintain what we have, let alone increase the frequencies?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic point. And as you know, we struggle currently with that, and it does impact frequencies. Our hope is that those impacts are not long-term in nature, that we're able to get through that hump. I don't know that we can project for you now the period of time it takes us to get through the staffing challenges, but your point is absolutely right. Those staffing challenges impact the level of service we're able to put on the road. The level of service we're able to put on the road has a direct relationship to our ridership. And so yeah, that is the labor shortage is a short-term, we hope, impact on the SIP and what our ridership projections are.
Okay, it looks like it's going to be an ongoing conversation.
Yes, for sure. And, we implemented the frequency changes to the Breeze bus this week. Our goal is to make those temporary changes, and hopefully we will add back the service as we're able to add new operators. But you will see the impact of that, those frequency changes on ridership in the subsequent months, just because there's less service on the road. Okay, and then at this point, I'm going to hand off to Katie, who will start to go into the projections and the SIP.
Chris, wait a second before you.
Oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
On the frequencies on the Sprinter and the Coaster, are either of these dependent upon, I don't know, Sandag dollars, double tracking, or infrastructure has to come first before this happens? Because even with the buses, you got to have more buses, you got to have drivers. I'm just curious if for the rail lines, is it even feasible? I don't even know if 15 minutes is feasible for the Sprinter without having some major infrastructure costs thrown in first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in the case of the 15-minute frequencies, there are infrastructure cost double tracking, signal improvements that all need to be made in terms of prior to us implementing that. And again, this is a 10-year look, so we plan for those. Those are in our capital plan, but the funding, timing, all of those things, all are still subject to the things we work through on a daily basis here. In terms of the coaster increased service, the first increased service went in place in October. We are anticipating the delivery of the added locomotives next year, and that would open the door for the next step in the coaster increase at that point.
Okay, but for now we can still increase frequencies or service on the coaster. We can do that with the engines, but eventually I guess we're going to have to also, it's going to be double tracking and things like that have to come in the near future. But okay, I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, in the outlying years, correct.
Yeah, okay. If we have to caveat those last two with depending on when the infrastructure gets in place to provide that. But okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the Breeze side, some of the outlying projections also are reflective of the Breeze speed and reliability study that you'll see in October. And that looks at things like BRT and things like that would be Breeze service improvements that would be in the outlying years as well.
All right.
Matt, anything to add there on that point?
Yeah. So, yep, you guys can hear me, correct? So a couple of things, and I think Chris was hitting all of the sweet notes. Just a reminder that it's the 10-year horizon for this stuff. Board Member Contreras, just to go back on the bus. To be specific, we are in the process. Damon and I, we're collaborating. We're meeting with the Teamsters and working through some of the issues that are associated with the hiring challenge that we experienced today. I think as we come forward with the budget, particularly as it relates to the 5-year budget, we're going to be making some recommendations to the budget that I believe will be part of the process towards helping us in the near term to be able to increase wages and benefits to attract more people, because despite the changes that we've made, we're still out of alignment from a market point of view to compete based upon the changes that have occurred. So we're working in 2 tranches, kind of what we can do immediately from a wage package, and then the long-term discussion about potentially transitioning in. But the timeline is that we're planning to bring this to the board over the course of the next few months to get approval on those actions. And from my perspective, we can't be in this position of operator shortage by the time we get to June of next year. That's kind of the timeline. The rest of the discussions around these things are dependent. We did just submit funding for some of the first early phases for the Sprinter. So for the signal system, we're prioritizing that design on the capital improvements for the Sprinter. We're prioritizing that. We do want to work with the county and with cities like Vista to discuss some of the road crossings I think we're going to need to partner really quick, fast, and hurry on potentially doing some grade separation projects if we're going to go to 15 and 10-minute headways. And so we're trying to advance all of those discussions as quickly as possible. I think Chris nailed it in terms of the bus service frequencies. We could do that fairly quickly, but the big piece that we want to focus in on is those infrastructure improvements on the road network and technology advancements that will allow the buses to be able to navigate at a higher rate of speed. And in accordance with that, also look at reducing the stops as we implement new first and last mile solutions. So this stuff is a lot more close to us in terms of being able to achieve, given the increased funding. But we do need to make sure we're working really closely in alignment with our cities and the county to make this happen, because some of these things can't happen for the grade crossings. The lead applicants has to be either the city or the county. So hopefully that addresses those questions.
Thank you, Executive Director Tucker. I was on the bus today, and the Vista Village crossing there, a grade separation is absolutely necessary. It took about 6 to 7 minutes for the bus to even move past that intersection. So, being able to locate on the Sprinter corridor where some of these grade separations need to happen. I know I've advocated to our Congressman Levin as well. So I look forward to tackling these issues, but thank you for that, the more information that you've brought to the table. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll go forward. So the next slide, please, Anthony, and I think Katie will take over here.
Great, thanks. So this graph provides a snapshot of San Diego County's COVID-19 cases since March of 2020. And this graph shows not only the duration of the pandemic, but also the relative scale of the most recent Omicron variant early this year, which you see in January and February of 2022. And so while we're considering ridership projections as part of the SIP development, it's important to note that future variants and the public health response may impact NCTD's ridership recovery and its regrowth to varying degrees. Next slide. So due to the variability of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we just saw, there are no current models available that can accurately forecast short, medium, and long-term ridership until that new normal has been established. So recognizing that it will take some time for transit agencies to recover from the pandemic, the state and federal government has enacted statutory relief to support its long-term investments in rail and public transportation. And those measures include the extension of hold harmless provision for the calculation and allocation of specified funding, the extension of the suspension of financial penalties associated with TDA, Transportation Development Act, fare box recovery requirements, and the STA cost efficiency requirements, and the expanded use of federal funds. Next slide. So this graph shows NCTD's system-wide ridership recovery in percent of the pre-COVID FY19 baseline since March of 2020. And while we're still actively impacted by the pandemic, as Chris said, we feel we're trending in the right direction with this recovery, and we use a lot of this data to help us build out those SIP projections. Slide. To give a bit more context to NCTD's recovery on the previous slide, here is how our ridership recovery compares to our peer agencies and the transit industry as a whole. So we have identified peer agencies based on the National Transit Database Systems Peer Selection Module, which varies by different mode. And that's why you'll see each mode listed separately. And this data that is compared on the slide shows data from October through December of 2021 compared to that pre-COVID baseline in fiscal year 2019. And it's showing that we're fairly consistent with our peer agencies on that mode by mode basis.
What's demand response? Sorry.
So demand response includes our Lyft paratransit mode and one of our flex routes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next slide. So on this slide, we have a comparison of our system-wide ridership to other agencies in our region. And we don't technically consider these to be direct peers, just due to the varying modes of service that these different agencies provide and the different service area types. But it also gives us some context and the sense that our ridership recovery is pretty consistent with our neighboring systems as well.
And just a note on this slide, the MTS results there reflect the addition of the blue line. And so part of that service in that corridor would be the addition of the blue line extension. So it's part of their ridership number.
Next slide. So due to the pandemic and other significant events, there are several impacts to NCTD's ridership, several different factors. So that includes the national labor shortage, which impacts our service frequency, high gas prices, changing travel and traffic patterns, which impacts our service reliability on the breeze, the potential for new COVID-19 variants, and various regional efforts like our fare incentive programs, which we'll talk about, and other transit supportive measures. So now just one of these factors within a given year would be pretty significant for NCTD's ridership, and we would consider in any SIP development. But the fact that all of these factors are occurring simultaneously with little indication of their relative duration or staying power definitely complicates our efforts to predict ridership levels. So we're really relying on a lot of what we've seen in the past, but I think what Chris said earlier, just to underscore that this is a historic, once-in-a-century event, and is definitely complicating our ability to predict the future. Next slide. So we have our draft operating projections for FY 2023 on this chart here. That includes hours, miles, and ridership by mode. So these projections, the service inputs are based on our historic service levels by mode and our ridership recovery rates in fiscal year 2022. We do take into consideration a temporary service reduction on Breeze due to the labor shortage, but for the most part, these operating statistics are largely consistent with our FY 2022 service implementation plan as well. On the next slide, we have our projected system-wide monthly ridership. We have on the left side our actual monthly ridership from the start of the pandemic, and then that dashed line shows our monthly projected ridership that is included in the draft SIP today. So these projections still display some seasonality that we see in our actuals, but overall display a progression of ridership growth through the pandemic in fiscal year 2023. And on the next slide, we have a similar view, but this displays our percent of ridership recovery in FY 23 compared to the FY 19 baseline. So again, you'll see some seasonality, but overall we're displaying a progression of our ridership recovery through fiscal year 2023. So those were both on the system level, and here we have our modal ridership projections. So when we were developing our ridership projections, we wanted to look at the actual ridership recovery that we've experienced since July of 2021. And from there, we assigned a stepped approach to ridership recovery throughout the fiscal year, meaning that ridership recovery percentages increase between the first half of fiscal year 2023 and the second half of fiscal year 2023. So we wanted to be able to reflect that the ridership recovery rates between modes we assume will increase a bit throughout the fiscal year, but are also different between each mode as each service is impacted by its distinct set of factors, such as the labor shortage, in-person schooling, commute patterns, just to name a couple of the factors. And I'll pause there because I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sure. I have a question, Katie, and I appreciate you going through this with us. Do we have, so we're missing about, 35 to 40% ridership. Do we have any idea as to, has there been a survey conducted? I don't know how we would reach that population, but do we have an idea as to why they're not riding, or if they intend to ride in the future? Is there any additional information about that population that we haven't recaptured?
I believe we'll provide some information on that in a couple of slides. We are undergoing a pretty robust market and research study with Deloitte, which I know that the board will be briefed on over the coming months. And part of that effort will include in-person surveying of our riders, riders and non-riders alike. So we really hope to get to that question of if you haven't returned to transit at this point in time, what is the driving factor behind that? And that will help us make future decisions to try to regrow ridership and bring folks back to the system. I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to add on to that as well.
Yeah, no, I think you've captured it well. And Chair, we will talk a little bit more about the Deloitte study in upcoming slides. But yes, that is intended to be the deep dive that you're talking about in terms of both ridership preferences, but then also market potential and market opportunities in the near and medium term. And that's really the point of the Deloitte study.
Awesome.
And I'll add that we have looked at a couple studies that SANDAG has conducted over the last year. It hasn't been since the Omicron variant, so it may not be the latest and greatest information, but they definitely have a couple of studies that we've looked at through the SIP development to try to understand kind of anticipated commute patterns or just any kind of public sentiment around that idea.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to see the rest of the presentation and, and reviewing it. I'm excited about the potential of increasing our ridership with, partnering with school districts as well. So, all right, I'm going to hit the mute button here for myself.
And I'll hand that over to Chris to talk about some of our ridership growth initiatives.
That was a great segue, Chair. Thank you. So you introduced the next section, so thank you. So, for 2023, we have a number of near-term initiatives to support ridership recovery and really attract new riders as we dust off the effects of the COVID-19. As the board knows, the board approved last month in its meeting the effort to make the promotional Sprinter Breeze discount pass permanent. So we'll talk about that. As the board's aware, we're also in the process of implementing the Youth Opportunity Pass. We're to the chair's point, we're working on the communications around our school trippers on our Breeze service. So that'll be underway. We're seeing a good recovery within our weekend and leisure travel on the coaster. So that's a very positive sign for us. And then we're working on first mile connections through our NCTD Plus pilot program. So we'll talk a little bit more about each of those. So next slide, please. As the board knows, we're moving forward with implementing the Sprinter Breeze discounted pass on a permanent basis. It was put in place in September as a temporary promotional fare. The results of that temporary promotional fare have been very, very positive. So we sell about 2,500 Sprinter Breeze monthly passes every month. And what this pass allows is riders to ride anywhere on the Sprinter Breeze within our service area in a given month. And the pricing of it at $59 for adults and then $19 for senior disabled Medicare riders and prior to May 1, our youth riders was a very strong value for our riders. So it's been a very popular pass. So we are going to make that a permanent part of the fare ordinance, provided SANDAG approval. So it's about 2,500 passes a month, and that's about $90,000 in revenue for the district. So a very strong product for us, and one we hope will continue to be a good basis of ridership. Next slide, please. As we informed the board last month, and as you may have heard, the Youth Opportunity Pass is implementation of the pass is underway. This is a SANDAG supported promotion pilot program. It'll run from May 1, 2022 to June 30, 2023. The board will receive a full briefing on this in the upcoming meeting, but we are in the process of the implementation of this. It'll allow riders 18 and under to ride free, basically throughout the region. So Sprinter Breeze, Coaster, MTS bus, and trolley. So it'll be, a real positive for the youth in our region. We are hopeful it will be a real driver of ridership, both in terms of increasing opportunities for youth to travel around the region, but also families. So it becomes a much more economical thing for families to travel as a group when the youth are free. So as I said, we're doing a full. There's a board agenda item on the Youth Opportunity Pass in April at the April 21st meeting. So we'll do a full briefing on that. But this will be over the next 14 months a strong driver of ridership.
Chris, do you know if SANDAG is backfilling any of the lost opportunities? I mean, the costs of this, or no? Are we going to be getting any sort of reimbursements from SANDAG? Yeah,
so that's part of the agenda item in April. There is a memorandum of understanding between the transit agencies and SANDAG for reimbursement for the cost of this. So there will be a reimbursement from SANDAG for the funding of this.
All right, thanks.
Next slide. We talked about the Deloitte study already, but this is just a little bit more about what the study is about. It's really doing consumer research, stakeholder interviews. The chair participated in a brainstorm around as a part of the study, and there's several stages, but really right now we're in the heavy research stage. Currently, the second stage will be looking at different scenarios in terms of possible futures for transit, and then coming back with some recommendations and some what we call, as we look at the Deloitte study, some no regret decisions. We've planned a full briefing for the board and an update on this project at the May board meeting, but this will be a really robust market analysis and a look at different scenarios in terms of how we plan the service and construct the service to grow ridership in the post-pandemic period. So there's more to come on this, but this is, we're actively working on the deep analytics around how we recover from the pandemic now. Next slide, please. And I'll let Katie talk about some of the other initiatives that are more longer term.
Great, thanks. So we did talk briefly earlier about the Brisbane reliability study, but just as a quick overview, it's a study that we're working on with SANDAG and Caltrans to evaluate opportunities to improve the reliability and the travel time competitiveness of 10 of our Breeze bus corridors. So we're actively working with each jurisdiction to first identify and validate the high priority congestion spots that could potentially be improved through various capital, operational, or policy improvements throughout the system. So earlier in March, we had one of our first technical working group meetings with the various city representatives just to work through kind of some of the data that we're seeing on NCTD's side and validate that what we're seeing in our system matches up with what the city is experiencing as well. So we're fairly early on in the study process, but we're excited to see the momentum gain, and we'll be coming back to this committee to present in October an update of the study. And next slide, please. So in conjunction with the Brisbane reliability study, we wanted to reflect investment in core Breeze routes in future years of the service implementation plan. So this is consistent with the strategic priorities included in the budget that you saw earlier in this presentation, which reflects investment in our network foundations and key corridors to ensure that service frequency and span are meeting customer needs, And we can, of course, complement this investment in our breeze corridors with first last mile connections as well. So we do include some assumptions for breeze frequency improvements in future fiscal years beyond FY 2023 in the SIP. Next slide. So another key project that the district is actively advancing is the double tracking of the Sprinter corridor. We are close to finalizing a project study report for the corridor that would increase Sprinter frequencies from 30 minutes to 15 minutes. Over the past couple of years, we've done a couple different modeling exercises to see how we would be able to increase frequency on our Sprinter corridor using the same equipment levels. And so we're actively working with our consultants to finalize that project study report, which would bring it to about a 5% design milestone. And we're continuing to seek funding to advance the project in various phases. So we're seeking funding to advance to future design phases, as well as advancing a key phase for signal modernization along the corridor. Slide. And in support of an improved customer experience and ridership recovery on the coaster corridor, we wanted to focus on ways in which the district can create new value for the customer. And so we're a few ways out of the Convention Center Station project, but this project was funded through Trade Corridor Enhancement Program funding in late 2020. And we're excited to keep progressing this project with our partners and create a much more integrated service into downtown San Diego for coaster customers. And it also presents us with some new opportunities to increase ridership growth for a growing leisure market and growing weekend ridership on the coaster. So we're excited to see this project progress. And in our draft service implementation plan, we're assuming that the project would be open to the public in later years, in late FY 25 or early 2026.
And I have a question regarding the coaster expansion here to the convention center. I mean, I love it because being in North County, it's ridiculous sometimes to get all the way down to San Diego. But one of the issues I know that I've ran into when looking at different ways to get to San Diego that aren't, auto-centric, is that sometimes how late the modes operate can be an issue. So, I know that we have constraints because there's also, freight that comes through. So, how is that going to be addressed, or is it going to be?
It's going to be addressed. So what you're really speaking to is the span of service. And so we just would have to coordinate with BNSF on the span of service. If you remember, I just want to make sure I say this. So the basis of the funding that we receive for the convention center is that it supports increased freight movement by freeing up the platforms at Santa Fe Depot. And part of that overall project, NCTD and BNSF worked on an operating plan that support increased freight combined with increased passenger train operations. So as we look towards the future and want to look at a wider span of service, that's a doable thing. NCTD and BNSF are actually doing a phase 2 study, looking at some of the other activities that are going to be occurring down south from a port perspective, from a traffic perspective, from a community point of view. Also taking into consideration some LOSAN plans for a new facility, even looking at stops at National City and particularly at the border. So we're working collaboratively on these kinds of issues, really with the focus forward, how we can do these things together in a really cost-effective and efficient manner that really supports significantly more use of that infrastructure that we have.
Wow, that's really exciting. Thanks for that information.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And next slide, please. Just a couple of next steps for both the service implementation plan, but also the budget development process. So We're continuing to refine the inputs in the service implementation plan. We'll take feedback today and at several different points throughout the budget development process to refine those inputs. And we're also reaching out to our industry peers just to understand how they're handling ridership projections and see if we're in line with their projections as well. So next, you'll receive a presentation at the April board meeting about the FY 2023 service implementation plan. The board will also receive a larger update on the budget development process at the May Board of Directors meeting. And then finally, the board will be asked to approve the budget at the June meeting as well. And that is all we have.
All right. And do we have any public comments for this agenda item?
We do not, ma'am.
Okay. Are there any questions from any of the board members or comments? If not, I definitely have some. So I really look forward to continuing to just look at how we can increase ridership, make our different modes more appealing to more people. And I'm really excited about the different opportunities to connect different parts of our region in a more cohesive and collaborative way. So thank you very much. And doesn't look like we have any need to vote on this item. It's just informational. So with that, the next scheduled meeting is our special board meeting on April 14th, 2022, and that will be at 2 p.m. And then our regular board meeting on April 21st, 2022 at 2 p.m. Seeing no other comments or questions, at this point, this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks. Good job.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.